Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. Hope you're doing very well today, and we are back at it again. That's right, we are going to bring you 5 more matches with BG the Rock, with modern Golgari Midrange. You've gotta love it. You've just gotta love it. If you don't, well, I don't know what to say. You probably don't love Magic in general, right? This is the what more can you ask from a modern archetype other than to interact fairly, to create a lot of decisions, to create a lot of interesting gameplay patterns, and of course to be plenty powerful, right? So that's what we do, and we are back at it again. I am going to give you a tiny little spoiler about this league right at the beginning of it. It just has to do with the matchups that we faced. So if you want to hear, if you don't even want to know that, then fair warning, you have 5 seconds to skip ahead, 30 seconds, so you don't hear the spoiler. 4, 3, 2, 1, and the spoiler is that we play Burn 3 out of 5 times in this league. So I had a little bit of time to revisit this list, which by the way is unchanged from the last time I played Rock on this channel, and I wasn't sure if I was going to upload them or not, or if I was just going to get some testing in. I did end up having a little more time than anticipated, so I did play a couple leagues, and this is one of them. And while in the past I have sought to bring you as wide a variety of gameplay and of opposing archetypes in each league as possible, there is also a time and a place for just kind of lasering in on a specific archetype. And still, as of right now, as of the recording of this video, Burn is the top deck to beat according to the meta, the top meta presence on MTG Goldfish anyway, and certainly it's one of the top decks in the format, even on power level, as well as presence. So we are going to play against Burn 3 times in this league, and I've said before that I think Burn is a pretty great matchup for us, one of the appeals to playing merely 2 colors of a green-black strategy as opposed to splashing the 3rd color, so we'll see whether that is borne out, and of course there's going to be another 2 matches to round this out. So of course this will be a replay. I'm not clairvoyant, I'm not seeing into the future. We are doing a replay here, and the list itself is unchanged, as I said, so there will be deck text in the description below. There's kind of a Fulminator and a no Fulminator build that I've devised in the wake of Eldraine with help from your feedback as the viewers on this channel, and as you can see, this is still the no Fulminator build. So we're going to get right into our league. We just have a few Patreon supporters to thank. We have 2 brand new ones. I'm going to do my best with the names here, guys. Forgive me in advance if I mess up, but we have a new Inquisitor named Renaud Bourgogne, and we have a Confidant named Andre Gugnac. I'm positive that I did not get those names precisely correct, but I thank you anyway, and very, very happy to have you on board, my friends. I do appreciate it. And finally, we have 2 existing patrons who have upped their level of support. We have a very recent Inquisitor, OD402, who has already climbed the ranks and is now a Confidant. Thank you so much, OD402. And last but certainly not least, we have longtime Confidant Remy Marchiat, who is the one who sponsored the Jund video, my most recent video besides this one, on this channel. And Remy must have liked the Jund video enough because he has now upgraded his level of support to the Tireless tier. So my friends, all 4 of you and all 60-something other Patreon supporters, you are the very best. I thank you. Thank you sincerely. Could not do it without you. And without further ado, let's play some Rock. And here we are, my friends, kicking off the league with a perfectly respectable keep in a blind game one. We have our 2 premier 1-drop threats. We have a nice piece of early interaction, and of course we have Liliana of the Veil. If we ever hit the 3rd land, we're going to be good. Opponent has mulligan to 6, and then they'll go Mountain Pass. So we know that we're up against Burn because I told you in the intro, right? But even before I knew that, I was suspicious of it, so I'm very happy to run out Hexdrinker here. Hexdrinker can be a win condition against Burn. Make no mistake, this card can, in the mid-game, become an immediate 4-4, and then, even though, it's not as mana efficient as Tarmogoyf, it is a similar power threat a way to block and or close out the game that they very, very hard time dealing with. Even post-side, hate pieces like Path to Exile and Rest in Peace can shut down Tarmogoyf. Not so with Hexdrinker once it's level 3, a 4/4, right? So anyway, the opponent, we do expose it to Searing Blaze. That's always a risk, but we're not really playing around Searing Blaze with this hand anyway, unless we're just playing Drago for the first 2 turns, which is not correct with the Lily in hand. So those are all the reasons I run out Hexdrinker. If they top deck a Goblin Guide, I'm happy to trade it off, right? So in any case, the opponent doesn't have any of those things. They have Eidolon of the Great Revel. So what I'm going to do here is sit back, because right now, if we sit back, we are stopping them from attacking. So they're going to have to point something at the board if they wish to attack. And they're going to tax themselves to do so, and they are going to hopefully not be burning our face. Sadly, they have Searing Blaze, which, as always, is kind of the best of both worlds here. So, yep, they get us. They get us pretty good. We'll wait till they go to beginning of combat, so they're not playing any other haste threats, or if they do, they'll be taxing themselves again with Eidolon. And then we will cast Abrupt Decay, taking care of Eidolon. Big, big pain, but we did take care of it. So now what do we do? Well, we have a couple really good options here. Tarmogoyf, the earlier the better. It's generally the correct thing. And that would even let us have a really mana-efficient turn since we just drew the Treetop Village. However, this is our window where Liliana is going to be good. You'll notice that Lily is far, far better against burn on the play than on the draw. So here, being on the draw and also having an expendable card in hand to pitch, I am inclined to just kind of force the Liliana, play the Tarmogoyf next turn. Hopefully we don't get punished for it. And even though we only get a mountain out of their hand, so burn these days is stronger, especially against us, than it used to be because of Sunbaked Canyon. However, Sunbaked Canyon and Fiery Islet make them more mana hungry than ever before. And that's where Liliana's +1 can be more universally good. Even if it's only getting a land out of their hand, that can still, help slow them down or help maybe strand a card in hand later in the game for a subsequent +1 to get them, right? So, having said that, doesn't look like that'll likely be the case here. Opponent Lava Spikes us. It is back to us, and once more, we're just going to begin by taking up. This time, I don't expect it to get anything, and it doesn't. They will Skullcrack us, but hey, we did slow them down. We stopped them from activating Canyon this turn. So Liliana still putting in a shift, even when she's not strictly at her best. We also, speaking of being strictly at its best, Tarmogoyf pretty close to that, 6-7, not too shabby. Treetop Village as well. So opponent will crack the Canyon, and then, sadly for OP, all they've got is an Arid Mesa. So, back to us. We, in turn, are also drawing lands. However, our position is very strong. We're going to go ahead and crack the Nurturing Peatland, and Scavenging Ooze, fantastic draw. So we could do one of two things here. We could just attack with the Treetop Village, and plan to play the Skoos next turn when we have the luxury of activating it more. I don't believe that to be really necessary here because we just have the Goyf as such a huge threat barreling down their throats. Doing it this way allows us to present lethal. We are going to eat something main phase because they do show us that they have main deck Skullcrack, so we're definitely doing that. And note that we ate our own Dark Confidant rather than eating their Eidolon, because even though generally we want to attack their graveyards, all else being equal, Eidolon is an enchantment, so the Goyf likes to have Eidolon around. And we could have kept that Overgrown Tomb in hand, or we could tick up to 6. Might as well tick up to 6. Maybe I forgot to mention the opponent also suspended a Rift Bolt last turn, so their 2 finds off of Draw Step and the Canopy land were Rift Bolt and Arid Mesa. Opponent has a Goblin Guide, not a very good draw, but to be fair, I don't think they had any outs here, main deck, in Game 1. And we draw Collective Brutality, the first of hopefully many times we'll draw at this league, and we just have the opponent dead to rights here, so we can do We can do it a few different ways. Wow, this client's super laggy right now. Let's just hit play. We can do it a few different ways, but of course, edicting and then firing up Treetop Village just has lethal on board. We don't have to style on them with Collective Brutality. Instead, we are styling on them with the apes, right? So, yeah, I mean, here's a great example of why I think our native matchup against Burn is very, very strong. Hexdrinker, even though it was not at its best, was still making life awkward enough for the opponent that if they didn't have Searing Blaze, they would have had to make a really suboptimal play. Even so, they did tax themselves to do that Blaze to take care of the Hexdrinker, which put them in range of exactly lethal this turn. Beyond that, more importantly perhaps, cards like Tarmogoyf, Scavenging Ooze, Liliana of the Veil, alongside Inquisition of Kozilek and Collective Brutality, these are probably our best cards in the matchup, and we're main decking so many things that are so good against the opponent. Cards like Treetop Village can go a long way to closing out the game too, so yeah, I will continue to beat the drum of if you want to beat Burn and also be a 50-50 deck against most of the rest of the meta, or at least 45-55 against a lot of it, Rock is a great deck to play. But it's far from a free win. Far from a free win. Every little decision matters, including the sideboarding decisions. So with our new look Eldrazi list, let's check that out. Alright, my friends, so against a stock Burn list, whether it be Boros or Naya, you know, they might play a little bit of different tech here and there, but you're going to sideboard against them in basically the same way, unless you see something really off the wall, right? So everything that gains us life is awesome here. Brutality, Murderous Rider, very, very nice to have access to a lifelinker here. Kalitas, obviously very nice, and we even have a Kitchen Finks in the deck right now. These four are all absolutely nailed on, awesome cards in the matchup. Now, Abrupt Decay is something that you kind of don't always want to bring in. There is such a thing as having too much removal in this matchup, so whether or not something like a Decay comes in is going to depend on the rest of your deck, and Plague Engineer is definitely a solid card in the matchup, but a tier below these top options here. So how much of the second column comes in is going to depend on what we have to bring out. So in terms of what we don't like, Thoughtseize and Dark Confidant, of course, just simply have to come out. And then, as it happens, we can accommodate the other two remaining slots for maybe cards coming in quite well. Because, look, Tireless Tracker is fine in the matchup. It's just obviously very slow. Especially the second copy of Tracker. I think I'd rather replace it with a third Plague Man. Tracker is very, very awkward in multiples in this matchup, whereas Plague Engineer can actually totally shut off a creature in multiples, or you can just debuff two different things if that's how the game's going. So I do rate the third Plague Man more highly than the second Tracker, and we can make a simple swap of Decay in, Pulse out, just to lower our curve a little bit. That's very, very important in this matchup. And if we were a little removal light in the main deck, then the Decay would come in for maybe a slow creature like Tracker. If we were too removal heavy in the main deck, if we were like really metagaming for go-wide decks and the decks where a lot of the important stuff dies to Trophy and Decay, then maybe we could bring out Pulse altogether and lean more on threats, right? But I think the main deck number of threats and the main deck number of answers is already kind of perfect. So what we're just simply going to do, as said, is swap that Decay in for the slower Maelstrom Pulse. So let's just show you exactly how the 60 will look post side. And there we have it. Going on to game 2. Alright, my friends, we are here on the draw in game 2, and this hand is absolutely spectacular with one glaring exception, Nurturing Peatland. Now, if this was not a Peatland, this would be a snap keep. If this is just a Blooming Marsh, as it is, this is a lot more borderline because we are just, unless we draw another Black Source right away, we are taking 1 damage per turn. Very, very bad against Burn. However, these 5 spells are all spectacularly good. I think the power of the hand is sufficient to warrant a keep, but it is worth noting just how bad that Nurturing Peatland is. But look, what could possibly be better off the top than Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth? Not only is it an untapped black source, it's going to let our Peatland tap for black painlessly. So this is actually the perfect top deck, not going to lie. Very, very happy with it. On top of that, the opponent does not even have a turn 1 play. So what kind of a hand did they keep without it? Well, a pretty good hand. They have 2 lands and 5 spells, which is right where they want to be. They do have Boros Charm, Eidolon, Helix, Skewer, and Path. So Path to answer our early threat, and then just a classic, really well-balanced burn hand. So I think the strongest cards in this hand are Eidolon and Boros Charm. I think there's a solid enough argument to take either, but we did end up taking away the Eidolon there. This just gives us the option to run out Skooz next turn if we want to. Wouldn't normally be the play to make, but with another lifelinker in hand and with Liliana trying to start attacking the resources, I think leaving ourselves that option is viable. Whereas if we had left Eidolon in hand, we don't really have that option. That said, having drawn Treetop Village, I did decide not to take it. Now we are more realistically going to be able to leverage the Skooz in the late game because we have a painless, second painless green source, third one total. So instead we're just playing draw go. We're holding up our Abrupt Decay at the risk of having a turn where we don't do much, and looks like that's going to be the case. I do believe it was correct to play the Forest and hold up Decay, though. We just can't take a free hit from a creature when we have removal in hand. And then we draw Collective Brutality. Well, how about that? We're just drawing really, really hot. So what do we do here? You know, definitely a few viable options, but I did decide to go with the Liliana of the Veil. So why is that? Well, we know that the opponent is main decking Skullcrack, and if you read my Patreon scouting report on Burn, we know that basically all guides recommend that all copies of Skullcrack come in post side. So we don't really want to fire off a Brutality blindly necessarily, especially when we can't fully escalate it. So again, it's just a good window for the Liliana, especially because they only are on 2 lands as far as we know. Now we do have to pitch the Treetop here. The rest of our hand is just that good. It's either that or Decay. And the opponent will Helix us in response. They'll pitch Skewer, so getting burn out of their hand is rewarded, rewarding us for that play. And then it's back to us. So once again, we're, it's a little counterintuitive because we were leaning more on the Ooze, and now we're continuing to pitch green lands, but that's kind of our problem when our hand is just this good. And once again, following the same principles of mana efficiency and waiting for like the perfect Brutality window, I'm just going to play Murderous Rider. And look, the opponent had the Skullcrack, so I have to say that we are extremely rewarded for doing so. Getting the Brutality blown out by a Skullcrack, especially when we would be escalating away something good, definitely not ideal. So opponent will go ahead and suspend a Rift Bolt, and then they're forced to point a bolt at the board, taking care of the Rider. So I'm alright with it. And we tick up the Liliana, getting the Searing Blaze out of their hand. The other thing that we could have done is just decided to leave her and then escalated with Brutality. But if they were sitting on, like a creature in hand, that would have been really, really bad relative to just ticking up. So we just tick up, and then it is Skooz time. We continue to not have like an ideal window for Brutality. It's definitely unusual, but it just speaks to the strength of our hand. And the opponent's got the Rift Bolt coming off suspend, and they do decide to go to the Dome with it rather than taking care of Skooz. Now, granted, Skooz only has 1 creature to eat in the graveyard. Opponent drew a land for turn, which is not very good. We're happy about it, but it also means that alting with Liliana, which would have been interesting to consider before, is no longer very good either. So we're going to go ahead and just simply use the Brutality to drain for 2. It's not the most impactful thing in the world, but that's the floor of the card, and now it is going a long way toward helping us stabilizing. Getting back up to 10 is very, very big game. We are extremely punished for this sequencing, though. I don't think it was wrong, but the opponent rips a creature after we've been playing pretty carefully around a top-decked creature as much as possible. Now they're going to rip one. just when we're shields down, putting us back to 9. We top deck more removal, sure. So we're just continuing to main phase our life gain effects with Scooze around Skullcrack, and the opponent finds another land for a turn, so that's awesome for us. We crack Peatland on the end step, Inquisition and Blooming Marsh, 2 pretty dead draws, but note that the opponent is on green. I don't know if they have any green cards in post side, but this is enough incentive for me to want to finally ult with the Liliana. We just split white versus green basically, and of course they keep white. You gotta imagine that's the main color, basically no matter what. So Ooze is going to just try to close out the game for us. Lightning Helix is going to try to extend the game, but we still have them on a 3-turn clock, and unfortunately we are starting to brick right now, so we're getting a little nervous. We hold this marsh because we have sufficient green for Scooze and for Decay on the field, no problem, and we have Brutality and Tracker to draw to. But the opponent has simply found not only another land, but another white land. So both of our top decks have been kind of bad, but we're the ones who've got them on the clock. The opponent's going to spike us, and then that's just going to do it. So a bit of a flurry of decision-making and of interaction in the mid-game, and then it just drags out to turn 11 with a 4-4 Scooze, just repeatedly beating face, and after the Liliana ult, the opponent not really finding enough to come back. So I think where that game was won was going on the Liliana plan early, because not only did we get plenty of value out of her, including finally deciding to cash her in to take them off of green, which could in theory have made some draws dead, we also crucially got that Path to Exile out of their hand. When a Liliana is just continually ticking up, and the opponent is not able to empty their hand quickly enough, and when we don't have a creature, Path to Exile will almost always be a correct card for them to pitch, because they just have to keep the stuff that they know is good, that they know is live, aka burn, and try to get as much value out of the hand, empty it as quickly as possible before Liliana rips it to pieces. So if we are trying to maneuver ourselves into a situation like this where Scooze takes over the game late, going on the Liliana plan when we know there's a Path to Exile in the opponent's hand that we haven't taken away and we can't afford to take away is definitely a way to get there. So there we go. Once again, the core cards of the deck pulling a ton of weight, and we started off with a nice 2-0 against Burn. And here we are, my friends, in round 2 with just kind of a unexciting threats and spells hand, but we do, or excuse me, lands and spells, or lands and threats, however you'd like to phrase it. We do, however, have all 3 of our spells are mana sync, so if there are some cards to have alongside a high land count, I guess it would be something like this. So, mindful of the potentiality of burn again, of course, we do go get a forest, and in general we can afford to do so given our plethora of other lands that can all get black sources if need be. And indeed, as I warned you in the beginning, it is another burn matchup. Goblin Guide, kind enough to flip yet another land, and then we trade with Hexdrinker. This is amazing. This is amazing. So this is why we run out Hexdrinker early against burn. That was great. It just turned into a fatal push, and we came out ahead on resources, and now we're drawing another Liliana. And for these reasons, I am going to play out the other Hexdrinker just the same. It is good if they go Eidolon. It is good if they go another Goblin Guide. It is not as good, admittedly, if they do this, which is Swifty into a second land into a Lava Spike. So we would be in chump block mode, and even that is actually reasonable a lot of the time. In this case, I don't think that's necessary. I think we just take the hit. That was our first major hit of the game. Sadly, we do have to fetch here, but we'll get a basic, and Liliana will edict away the Swifty. Hexdrinker is gonna smack him back for 2. Under some circumstances, it can be correct to leave that back, again, in case they have another haste threat off the top. But if they have literally Goblin Guide is the only reason we should hold back Hexy, because with Swifty, they're going to have another spell to make it just like it was last time, right? So back to us. We're continuing to draw a lot of lands. It wouldn't be very good except for the fact that we do have these mana sinks. So we tick up with Lily. Pitching the Bob, the lands are just better than Bob at this stage. And we could pile a bunch of... So, let's talk about this. Interesting decision, actually. We could pile a bunch of levels onto the Hexdrinker and force them to decide whether or not to bolt the snake. Instead, I am going to kind of diversify my threats a little bit and also play a little bit more defense against a creature by playing Tracker. This is also better against an Eidolon next turn, just getting our spells down. You know, we can crack clues, we can add levels all with Eidolon down, no big deal, that doesn't tax us at all, whereas being a little too cute with the Tracker might. So we just take our value there. Opponent has a Boros Charm. That's a little scary because now we're at 9. They play a land, they've got 2 cards in hand. Well, we are continuing to flood. So I'm going to go ahead and crack a clue first just to get a little bit more information. Maybe we draw a spell that informs our decision on which land is best to play. Or we get more information on which land is best to pitch. So now we know that Blooming Marsh is going to be a free pitch here, so we'll make our clue before anything else happens, and then we will take Lily up. And maybe the opponent can get their whole hand out. With 4 lands, it is likely. But we still are supposed to take up here for sure. Opponent will Helix us, and opponent will Charm us. So we are down to 2. Pretty scary place to be. But you know what? We do have a pretty powerful board here. And so we have a 4/4 that can become a 6/6 next turn, but even if it doesn't, we can present lethal next turn just by attacking with a 4/3. Even if we don't add any more levels or crack any more clues, we're just going to hit for 4 this turn, 8 for next turn. That is exactly lethal. So we hold back Hexdrinker as a way to play around any creature they could have. We can beat any creature right now, but we cannot beat a burn spell off the top. They have at least 1 look at it, possibly 2, and boom, it's a Lightning Helix right off the top. So what are you going to do? Honestly, we got turn 5'd by burn through a Hexdrinker, which functioned as basically a Fatal Push, and then a Hexdrinker, then some Liliana activations. We didn't, like, if we had 1 more piece of good interaction, I think we would have won. But we didn't, and it was still really, really close because our progression was so painless, and because we had the mana sinks making our flood, turning our flood into gold, really, right? So, close game, good game. We didn't have a very good progression against burn, and we still almost got there, which again, I think is indicative of our strength in the matchup. But it's a lot harder to drop game 1, because then you have to win 2 post-side games. Let's see what we can do about that. Alright, my friends, we're on the play, and I did it. I kept the risky hand. Look, you couldn't ask really for better spells than these. You know, Hexdrinker is not as strong as the rest of the hand. I mean, obviously we need a lot of help to even cast half of these cards, but turn 1 Inquisition is one of the top 3 things we can do. These are the top 3 things we can do in this matchup, in my opinion, is turn 1 Inquisition, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, and a fully escalated Brutality sometime early in the game. We have all 3 in our opening hand, and the 1 land we do have is Painless. So, as much as this is a risky keep, we have literally the 3 most powerful things in the matchup, especially when we're not counting, you know, relatively narrow sideboard cards like Finks. And we also have the failsafe of being able to push next turn if we don't hit our second land. So, a risky keep, admittedly, but one where the payoffs are most certainly there. So, of course, we begin with Inquisition, and these opponents with their 2-land, 5-spell hands, it's very, very ideal for them. Pretty tough to see, but we see the Goblin Guide and the Swifty. I think we definitely have to take the Swifty here because we want them to play the Goblin Guide. That means they're likelier than any other way to draw them, than any other thing we could do to draw them, for them to draw us, out of our Mana Screw. And it also means we have a good turn next turn by pushing the guide after it gives us a second trigger, even if it doesn't trigger this time, right? So, worst case scenario, we get to push it next turn. And look at that, Goblin Guide showing us to new vistas to the Field of Dreams, the Field of Ruin. You gotta love it. And then we hit the third land right off the top. So the risky keep, my friends, has officially been rewarded. I don't want to downplay how risky it was, but again, I also don't want to downplay how big the payoff is. So here we get to see the big payoff. We're going to pitch Push and Hexdrinker. I think those are the correct pitches. We do have Liliana Edict to take care of another creature, and as it happens, they've drawn one. So Boros Charm, Lava Spike, Lightning Bolt. You always do want to just take a moment to consider whether taking a 1-mana spell is better simply to gate them on mana, especially with a Liliana. But when Boros Charm is involved, Boros Charm is it's really hard to argue against it, right? So opponent goes Mountain Spike, Goblin Guide, and of course swinging for 2. This guide is not as good at his job as the other one. Doesn't hit us a land, shows us the Questing Beast, so that's a spicy draw. So what do we do here? We have a fetch land. If we get Overgrown Tomb, that unlocks all of our mana. I'm not speaking clearly this time. Sorry, guys. This gets us double black, and it also gets us green. We need both. But we also need double green, and we also have Field of Ruin that might be a live play coming up, which not only can fix our mana, but can also take them off of white, at least for the moment. So I erred on the side of painlessness, and it's arguable that Tarmogoyf is simply the better play anyway. So we go ahead and play the Goyf. Opponent is going to Searing Blaze us, and also not attack. So that's definitely an interesting one. They could also have spent Bolt on the Goyf, but the other thing this allowed us to do is bluff Fatal Push. So maybe they just are thinking we have Push. They don't want to give us the trigger. It's very, very interesting. So they just use the landfall trigger to cast the Blaze, and then don't take the opportunity to try to force a trade or try to finish off the Goyf. So we'll see how that plays out. We're going to swing back with the Goyf, and our decision last turn is extremely rewarded to just err on the side of painlessness because we draw another Goyf. So make no mistake, we are being rewarded for some decisions that could go either way, really. End step, opponent will Bolt us. We're down to 8. And then they pass, we draw a Hexdrinker. Okay, not the most thrilling in the world, but it is castable. And it is able to play defense against Goblin Guide, so it's good enough for me. Gives us free reign to send in both of the goats, smashing in, taking 8 damage to the face as our opponent, and then we follow up with Hexy. And once again, the bluff seems to be in play, and getting Hexdrinker even to level 3 next turn, much less to level 2 this turn, should not be material to the outcome of the match. Therefore, I think it is better to just bluff here with the Swamp. End step, opponent's going to crack the Sunbaked Canyon and Lightning Bolt us, so they need to have exactly 2 1-mana burn spells here in order to beat us, and they don't. They have a Sunbaked Canyon that they're going to crack. So as long as we successfully assign this block here, we are going to win, and looks like that's the case. So we take the block, then the opponent will scoop. All right, so a risky keep that was rewarded by not only having the land right on top, but also Goblin Guide finding it for us. And then an interesting decision about whether or not to Fetch and Shock and play the Liliana, or even, Fetch and Shock and play the Goyf and just have Liliana mana available versus being painless. So we did, at the end of the day, decide to be painless, and look, we finished the game at 5 life. They've got 2 cards in hand. It's very, very possible that they would have simply bolted us to death right here, right now, if we had fetched and shocked. So my advice, I guess the takeaway from this game here is, when in doubt, err on the side of painlessness. Sounds obvious against burn, but there are a lot of situations where you can talk yourself into, it's only one fetch and shock, right? It'll be fine, and then it turns out to be what lost you the game. So anyway, Tarmogoyf OP, Collective Brutality OP, we got there. Let's move on. Okay, this is the hard one, guys. This is game 3 on the draw, but we are sideboarded, we are favored, and we do have a Collective Brutality hand. So even though the rest of the hand's aggressively medium, This is a keep. This is definite keep. Brutality OP, right? So opponent doesn't have the turn 1 creature. That's pretty nice. And we draw another Brutality. All right, well, I will not say no to that. So back to the OP. Arid Mesa and Eidolon. It's a great turn 2 play, but Brutality answers it quite well. So second Blooming Marsh is a pretty nice draw. It allows us to just aggressively pitch more painful lands. I did decide to split the difference. We'll pitch 1 trophy. We shouldn't need another trophy alongside 2 Brutalities. And Peatland can just be a redraw in the mid-game, because right now we don't have a threat. That's our big thing, is we don't have a threat. So I like keeping Peatland there. And we, of course, fully escalate, and we see Boros Charm, Searing Blaze, Lightning Helix. Well, it's a really strong hand, plus Goblin Guide, which we can't take. And Boros Charm is going to be the take of choice there. Opponent plays the Goblin Guide, and back to us, we will play out that Nurturing Peatland. But it is collective time yet again. The Goblin Guide walking right into our Brutality, don't mind if you do, and with only 1 mana open, there's no chance of Skullcrack blowing us out. The opponent's continuing to draw gas, though. It's a bit scary. There's another Boros Charm in hand, and that's once again what we kind of have to take away. So right now it's our Liliana against 3 cards, you know? I don't know who's favored right now, but I do know that it's turn 4, and we're still at 17. So the opponent finds yet another Goblin Guide. This one not really doing it for us in terms of the new, showing us to new territories. So we've got to take the pain off of Peatland, and we've got to Edict. So back to the opponent, they do nothing, they will pass. Now is where Liliana's looking pretty good, because they are gated on mana. We know she's going to get some kind of gas out of their hand. Fatal Push is the pitch here. And we get the Searing Blaze out of the opponent's hand, which does give us the window to play a Hexdrinker that is likely to live. So, or at least to trade 1-for-1 with a card, right? So Hexdrinker, we are going to put a level on, but not the second level, not at the cost of a point of life. No way. No way would that be correct in my opinion, especially because we can put it to level 3, which is really the goal, without taking any damage next turn. Opponent will pass, we draw Quagmire, that is cool. We'll tick up. Opponent will Helix us. These Helixes are pretty annoying at this stage, because not only are they burn, they are extending the game. Opponent back up to 21. Hexdrinker, the 4/4, getting busy, and opponent punishing us for tapping out by ripping a creature off the top. Rather annoying, but it does give Liliana something good to do, and we will Edict the opponent. It's kind of an unusual situation here, but we have 4 other lands, and Castle Locthwain still enters tapped. Very, very interesting, and it would have been quite an interesting decision as to whether to take the Peatland damage if this did enter untapped, to put all 5 levels on Hexdrinker, just make it a 6/6 right now. And I don't actually think I would have. I think I still would have erred on the side of caution. Going from 7 to 6 is very, very scary, right? So instead we will crack Peatland looking for more gas, and we find it. It is Kitchen Finks. So we're putting a couple levels into Hexy, because why not? And back to the OP. They drew a Skewer, and that's a good card. Any burn at this stage is good, but they can no longer really answer Hexdrinker. And we just drew our Kitchen Finks last turn, so we're back up to 6. Hexdrinker slowly climbing the ladder all the way up to mini Progenitus status. And Liliana back at 2. I don't really know what the opponent can have here to beat us. And it's just a Riftbolt. That's all. That's a card, but Finks put us up out of Boros Charm range, and now the opponent was just dead on board with us pumping levels into Hexy. But look, we drew QB. We are not going to deny QB getting in on the act. We take Liliana up to 3 for style points, and then we send in the greenies, and the opponent is done for. So Hexdrinker was pretty cool there. You can see how in a matchup like this where you have to interact heavily, the flexibility of Hexdrinker, like putting a level here, a level there, a level here, a level there, and also being able to respect our life total enough not to feel forced into using Peatland to activate Hexdrinker. It's just like, it's fine in the matchup as a Savannah Lions. It really is fine in the matchup in that role. Therefore, you are not pressured into leveling up aggressively at all. You just do it when you don't have anything better to do, and or when it's the perfect window to make it a 4/4. Even 6/6 is not that different. 4/4 is really where the card becomes awesome in the matchup. And of course, we had Kitchen Finks looking real good there. We did get to live the Brutality Dream yet again. And Liliana, once more, is key to our success. So, yeah, we take down Burn yet again. I warned you that this was going to be a fiery league filled with lots of 7-card combos on the other side of the table. 7 times 3 being the magic number for Burn, right? So we did get there yet again, and I hope you are enjoying this matchup, seeing how many different ways this matchup can play out, and we're going to face it one more time. So let's go to round 3 and see Burn yet again. Alright, also, as I just said, this is another Burn one, but we don't know it in the dark, but I think this is a weak keep, but it is a keep in a blind game 1, on the strength of turn 1 Thoughtseize more than anything, but also Brutality, able to turn clunky hands into gold, whether you're mono-flooded or mono-screwed. Brutality is a nice card to have to shore up that type of situation. And as you may have heard me say before, I am disinclined to mulligan, especially in game 1s where I don't know what I need, and I'm already probably a little bit unfavored. We're a classic 45-55 deck in game 1s that definitely gets better. You know, whatever our base number is, it's going to go up post-side against almost any deck, right? So, in any case, once again, we are into the breach, once more into the breach against Burn. This time they kept a 1-lander. It's a less than perfect keep, for once, from these Burn opponents. And we see triple Lightning Bolt, Swifty, Guide, Eidolon. Very, very frightening hand. And we definitely have a couple options here, including taking the Eidolon just because it's that powerful. But look, right now, we don't even have any other spells to cast, right? So we're going to just once again kind of corner our opponent into playing the Goblin Guide turn 1, which is going to play to our hands, and maybe net us a little bit of card advantage, which it does. So that was the play, and once again we get to fully escalate a Brutality for the, 4th time this league? Definitely feels pretty good, and we see that the opponent has hit their second land right away, so that definitely is a little bit scary because it means they go on the Eidolon plan probably right away. But nothing we can do about it, and we have drawn a nice card in the form of Scooze. And then we draw an arguably even nicer card in the form of Tarmogoyf, especially at this particular juncture. So Goyf can actually make life really awkward for the opponent when they are on an Eidolon plan, if they're already kind of behind on the board, and or on life totals if they had to aggressively fetch and shock a couple times, because the Goyf can actually outrace a Burn deck if the Burn player is taxing themselves with every spell, right? So whether that will be the case, I don't know, but definitely a better play there than a Scooze that we could only activate once. So we draw Assassin's Trophy. Hey, that's our answer to Eidolon. Pretty cool. So we go ahead and play the Goyf, or attack with the Goyf rather. And then I made the decision here to trophy Eidolon, and I think it was wrong. I think it was wrong because, trophying Eidolon in general is fine before we make any other plays. Although, that's kind of an issue, that's kind of a question in and of itself. Do we want to take the 2 to get the Scooze down? Then the opponent can maybe just pass, and we're kind of playing chicken with the Scooze activations. It's really interesting to decide what to do there. We also have to be wary about the prospect of main deck Skullcrack, which is more and more common these days because Burn is everywhere and people are teching against it, so Burn is teching against the anti-Burn tech, right? But that in and of itself was an option to just attack with the Goyf, then run out the Scooze. The problem with that is we are going to guarantee that we're taking 4 damage off the Eidolon, because we're going to have to trophy it sooner or later, right? The opponent will attack first with Eidolon. That kind of forces our hand with the Scooze activations. So I decided, okay, we're not going to play the Scooze. We're going to be more patient with it. We're going to trophy. And then I decided, well, trophying the Eidolon grows the Goyf, so that's the way to do it. Now, I don't actually know for sure that that's correct, because yes, it gets us one other point of damage here, and yes, we do have to trophy the Eidolon this turn, or on the opponent's turn. But that does give the opponent the third land right now, and it means they're not taxing themselves with their own plays. And we're max punished for it because the opponent's one unknown in hand was Boros Charm, so that's really frightening. And then the opponent, as we know, just has triple Bolt in hand, so I mean, that is definitely pretty brutal, and we do have at least one turn to stabilize unless they draw yet another 1 damage source, and when you look at that, they drew yet another 1 damage source, so you can say that those are officially the nuttiest draws that they could have. I think that's pretty clear. Oh, sorry, it's even worse than I was saying, because I forgot to track the second bolt. They only have 1 bolt left in hand, so they drew 2 1 damage sources with a Skewer the Critics and a Goblin Guide, the guide being in some ways necessary to turn on the Skewer, so you couldn't possibly get punished any harder for a decision than we just did there. And if those are going to be the cards on the top of their deck, well, I don't think we were winning anyway. Look, the opponent's all the way up at 13, and there's some food in the yard for Skoos, but again, unless we had the perfect window for it, unless we're able to kind of outplay their effects, I don't know if we were going to get there, but man, that is a really scary turn 4 from Burn. Again, Burn winning turn 4 through discard into fully escalated brutality and a removal spell for the Eidolon and a Goyf. I mean, what are you going to do about it? So I think in retrospect, the best line would have been probably to attack with the Goyf and then just pass, only hit them for 4, wait until the beginning of combat step to trophy the Eidolon. But again, we did get maximum punish for that decision, which I think is reasonable in a vacuum. And then the other option, of course, was just to run out the Skoos and see what happens. I think that's actually not as strong on average as it would have been against this particular progression. Against their particular progression, that might have worked out a little bit better. Again, I still don't think we probably get there, but yeah, lots of things to consider, and it just shows you how every little decision matters here. But either way, very, very strong Burn progression. Their only weakness of their hand was that they only had 1 land. They drew the second one right away, and they drew perfect gas off the top. So that's how they get us game 1, and let's go check out. Alright, my friends, so here in game 2, we are on the play. We've had a lot of underwhelming hands, it must be said. We've seen a lot of brutalities, which is awesome, but besides those, I think our hands on average have been underwhelming. That said, I do think this is a keep. There's a lot of things that they can do, like turn 1 fetch Lava Spike to make our Goyf good, even on turn 2, and Liliana on the play is amazing against Burn. And we have totally painless mana, lots of reasons to keep it, but it is a little bit underwhelming. And they don't go fetch Spike, they go Canopy Land into Swifty. So instead of running out a 0-1 Goyf, we're just going to run out our Savannah Lions and put a level on. Searing Blaze would punish us significantly here. They don't have that. That's good news. Instead, they are just skewering the Hexdrinker, not giving us a choice whether or not to chump, and then hitting us with a double prowess Swifty. We draw Fatal Push. So an interesting spot here, we could, of course, just go Liliana Edict, or we could get our Tarmogoyf down and hold up Fatal Push. I think it's 6-1, half dozen of the other here. And in this particular case, I did decide to go with the Goyf plan, and in the hopes of racing them, because Goyf is already so huge as a 4-5, but the opponents got a Rest in Peace, which does significantly punish us for that decision. So, fortunately, again, we do have the Fatal Push. We wouldn't have taken that line if we didn't have the push, but because the opponent, here's 2 things we couldn't have known. We couldn't have known they were on Rest in Peace because we didn't have discard, and we couldn't have known that they were only on 2 lands. Maybe turn 1 Sunbaked Canyon is a hint about that, but there's no way to really know, right? So, very, very annoying. We are max punished for going Goyf. If we had leaned on Lily, then we would be working on their hand starting right now. Sadly, we cannot, and Rather than doing so, I am going to take the chance to take them off of their redraw and off of white. I think that's definitely correct there. And then we still have a nice Collective Brutality escalating once for the drain and for the discard mode. And we see what a stacked hand that was. I accidentally clicked past it. But it's a stacked hand, but there's only one castable card in it, which is Rift Bolt. We take it away. And I think that's definitely correct there. We're not eating through the extreme value of this unless we just draw runner, discard. And we, this way, are taking away the only castable spell and forcing them to find exactly a white land right off the top immediately. Otherwise, the Liliana will go to work on the hand just as she could have been this whole time. Now, of course, the opponent instantly draws the white land, which does significantly punish us for doing what we did last turn, even though I don't think it was incorrect. And Murderous Rider is a lifelinker. It's a strong card. We're going to play it out. And we just have to delay the Liliana yet again. Opponent gets to Boros Charm us. It's not very ideal. And then they find another white land. However, at least this one enters tapped. So if we play Liliana this turn, we do get to get one of those cards out of their hand. So we'll attack with the Rider. We'll see if they decide to, for some reason, let it through. But of course, they will Helix it. And then we have a bad draw of another dead card in the form of Goyf. At least it's something we're not sad to pitch, right? So we get our dead Goyf out of the hand. We get the last Boros Charm out of their hand. And look, our position now isn't even that bad. It's turn 6. We're still at 11 life. We have a Liliana on 4 that can eventually ult and get us out from under the Rest in Peace. We have a Goyf to at least chump block or to become a credible threat if the opponent... if we have removal for the Rest in Peace. And then the opponent finds Eidolon of the Great Revel. So that's something we can answer painlessly, which is pretty nice. And then we have another Liliana, which is not a great draw, but it does at least make sense for us to Edict and then play the other one out, right? Opponent will pass, we'll tick up. We have yet another bad draw in the form of Push. Opponent has a good one in the form of Helix. So what are you going to do? Our Goyf is just embarrassing right now, just a 0-1 chillin'. Not accomplishing much of anything. And it's back to the opponent. They continue to just draw burn. So, end step, we get a little bit desperate. We activate Castle Locthwain. So, even though this puts us in range of Boros Charm, I think it is correct. That is our very best window to do so. There are other cards that might stay stuck in hand and we'll take 2 damage to activate instead of just 1. And we have already seen 2 charms, so the notion that they'll have a 3rd charm, pretty low odds of that, right? So we find a Scooze, another great card that just happens to line up quite poorly against RIP. But Liliana's up to 6, we get to empty our hand, and the opponent found an Eidolon. So very interesting here. We would be very happy to Edict the Eidolon and then just keep chugging along if we drew something useful here. But once again, we draw dead. So we're just very, very bad off the top in this particular game, and we are priced into taking a risky maneuver, but one that's actually arguably correct even in a vacuum. So we're forcing them to choose between having lands and having their hate pieces. So if they had chosen to keep Rest in Peace and Eidolon, well, Scooze can trade with Eidolon, and hopefully the lack of lands will just mean that they've got a ton of stuff locked in hand, and then that would make our Inquisition good. On the other hand, they could just keep the lands, and then we get to trade our Liliana for the Rest in Peace and for the Eidolon. So I'm definitely happy with that ult either way, and we're just going to Inquisition nobody. We Inquisition the opponent or ourselves, doesn't matter. And we're starting the Tarmogoyf train. It's a 1-2 now, so look out. We could have made it a 2-3, but putting ourselves to 3, pretty loose. Obviously not going to do that. And the opponent does rip a Goblin Guide, which is very, very annoying because this is a card that we could have at least chump blocked for this entire game, but now it's going to come down at just the right time for the OP. Put us to 2, now we're dead to just about anything in their deck. He did find us a land, but now it's our time to flood. So we'll crack a Peatland. We're finding more lands. It's all very bad. We're going to attack with the Scooze, leave the Goyf back, and the We're Dead do a burn spell, and the opponent has the burn spell. So, I mean, our draws off the top were horrifically bad in this game, especially considering the Rest in Peace. We would have had like a below average draw progression off the top, even if they didn't have an RIP, but the only decent cards we found for the most part were soft to the RIP. So hey, I've said this before, sometimes you can just win through this card like it isn't even there, and the opponent really regrets bringing it in. Sometimes you can just answer it 1-for-1, it's no big deal, doesn't really change anything. And sometimes the opponent needs to top deck burn, or they're dead. Often it comes down to one turn, do they top deck burn or do they not? And they'll top deck this and they're dead. Other times it can just kind of single-handedly win the game. And that's kind of what happened here. It basically single-handedly won the game. Now, I will say that even though it did, if the opponent had not immediately found a white land right off the top, right after we took them off of white and left them with 3 white cards in hand and nothing else, then I think our Liliana would have put us far enough ahead where we could realistically have won despite our terrible draw. At least would have been a closer game without question. But hey, sometimes we have the nuts, sometimes the opponent has the nuts. I think they basically had the nuts game 1, and while they didn't have the nuts here, they had a very, very good, strong progression that punished us left, right, and center for what we were trying to do. So, super interesting games. I really like playing the burn matchup. The decisions are all impactful. The dimension on which the opposing deck attacks is interesting. It might not look interesting on paper, but it's kind of interesting, at least to navigate against, right? And it is, it's a fair deck. It's a powerful deck. It's a deck that punishes stumbles, but it's one where we are also favored. So all those reasons, it's one of my favorite matchups, but they do sometimes get us. And we go down to 2-1 in the league, having beaten Burn twice and then lost to it a third time. I think winning about 2 out of every 3 matches against Burn, yeah, that's about right. So good games, well played to all 3 of our Burn opponents, and that was our gauntlet of Burn, my friends. Now let's take a look at the final 2 rounds of this league, which I promise you are not against Lava Spike Tribal. Okay, so it's round 4. We have lost the die roll, and we have an utterly unkeepable 7. We gotta toss it back. And this is a super risky 6. If we were post-side and I knew what I was looking for, I think I'd mull this one too. But we're on the draw, we're likely to hit our land drops. And as I've already said once in this league, I do not enjoy mulling at all in game 1s, especially down to 5. So we're going to keep it. We're going to hope the opponent is playing things that die to push and decay, and they go turn 1 power plant. So yeah, maybe not so much, and we don't hit a land. So we've got one more chance to hit a green land before this becomes a disaster. The opponent has the second Tron land, Terrifying, but they go turn 2 Mind Stone. So this is actually Eldrazi Tron. It is not regular Tron. It means our, small anti-small creature spells are a lot more relevant. And look at that, we draw Forest. What a good draw. So I believe it to be correct here to just take the chance to hit their Mind Stone. They rarely have natural Tron without doing anything for it, and Mind Stone in and of itself still represents a almost free cantrip if they do. So whether we see it as a way to take away their free draw, almost free draw mana-wise if they're on 7 mana, or a way to slow down their mana, or both, I believe that to be better than playing the Goyf. And they just kept 7 with Natty Tron on Eldrazi Tron. Yeah, I hate to see it. And they have another Mind Stone making our play last turn less optimal. Reality Smasher, more of an issue for us. But look, we've got a great answer to it in hand in the form of Lily. We've just got to draw the 3rd land. And we don't. We draw Inquisition. So pretty horrendous here. So what do? We could play a Goyf, it's more mana efficient, but I think Inquisition here is the play to take away another creature because we're kind of all in on Liliana. And look, that's exactly what happens. The opponent is absolutely flush with Tron lands, but they are out of gas. And we take away Ballista, and now we do still have the out of drawing a untapped land of any kind, because Urborg will produce enough black for Liliana Edict to be good. Opponent will crack the Mind Stone, play another tower, get in with a Smasher, And then it is back to us. So we've got the window, and we fail to hit the land yet again. Very punishing to not curve out after we've taken a mulligan. We've just got a lot of redundant stuff in hand. So we play out a Goyf, a little bit too small to tangle with the Smasher, and then the opponent rips Thought Knot. Very, very brutal. So we're just behind. We're just one step behind at every turn. We could chump there, but I don't believe that to be correct because Goyf can actually block Thought Knots here and make their attacks worse next turn. Like, chumping there just doesn't get us anywhere. We draw Collective Brutality, so we have a couple options here. We can play the Goyf, we can play a second Goyf, and then we can threaten a double block on Smasher. That is interesting, but it is soft to them having some way to remove it. And Eldrazi Tron does play kind of a lot of removal, especially when you consider stuff like Ugin the Ineffable, and the fact that they're big enough to cast... They have enough mana to cast any of their very top-end payoffs as well. So we do just Collective Brutality to drain, to try to keep the game alive, and maybe, just maybe, have a good draw next turn. We scare the Thought Knot off from attacking. Opponent's got the Blast Zone. That's another way they can take care of our stuff. Pretty rough. I mean, this matchup is just miserable, if you ask me. And we draw the land too little too late. Most likely, but we do have exactly one out. So we fetch for a basic, we Fatal Push the Thought Knot, we've got to draw a trophy off of the Thought Knot, and instead it's another land, just another land. So Tarmogoyf is finally big enough to block the Reality Smasher, which is sweet, but it is dead to Blast Zone. So Blast Zone going to take care of us, Smasher gets in, and there you go. So I went through that one pretty quickly because it wasn't that competitive of a game. Maybe I should have looked more closely. I don't remember if we had an option to like escalate with Brutality, pitching push to grow the Goyf. I don't want to do a retake here, but maybe someone in the comments can tell me. Just looking back, oh no, that wasn't the case because we already had Decay in the yard, right? So yeah, I don't know if we had any other lines that we could have taken besides the ones that I already mentioned. Look, I mean, they're at 18. They've got 6, 8, 10, 12 mana. We are not getting there. They out-top deck us like crazy, and we just have a bunch of kind of average threats in hand, with the exception of Tarmogoyf. So, I mean, this is Eldrazi Tron. Even if you're curving out well and functioning well, their stuff just goes over the top of you on average most of the time. It's not unwinnable, but it's very, very bad. And then if we stumble like we did here, like we have to take a mulligan, so we're down on resources. And we did admittedly hit our second land drop on turn 2, which was nice, but we missed that third land drop for way too long. We had the Liliana on curve. I think we would have had a real game. We didn't get there. They just drew more Eldrazi. That was that. So it's tough. It's a real tough matchup. I never like to see it, but we got to try to win these ones, even if we're unfavored, even if we don't like them. So to that end, let's check out how we side with our new look list. Okay, so against the hated Eldrazi Menace, what do we do? Well, now that Fulminator's not in the deck, you know, in the past I've brought in one Surgical against Eldrazi Tron. I've never felt thrilled about it. I've just felt like it's kind of a gotcha card. Sometimes it's value negative, but playing the value game can be a little bit of a losing proposition anyway. So when I was on 2 Surgical, I never brought in the 2 against Eldrazi Tron, but I was usually happy enough to bring in 1. But now that we don't have Fulminator, I don't think that's as good anymore, so not bringing it in. Ashiok does not do enough here, unlike against regular Tron, to come in, and most of this other stuff is just pretty bad, but we have a lot of cards that are decent. Now, the big problem with this matchup is so many of our cards are not slam dunks, because they're just like an aggro deck that cheats really, really hard on mana, and that also outsizes us and taxes us and disrupts us and plays a bunch of I win cards against a deck like ours. So I'm not like too excited about anything, but I do think these cards should all come in. Collector Ouphe, you may have seen me last month write about Eldrazi Tron on Patreon and also play a game against it on the channel, where I'm like, I think you should commit either to the Ouphe plan or to the Fulminator plan, not to both, because you don't want to dilute your core plan too much. Of course, by definition, we are not committing to Fulminator plan with this list, so Ouphe it is. Ouphe is solid enough in a lot of windows. It can definitely hose them. Murderous Rider is actually one of the most exciting sideboard cards here because it is just a 2-for-1 and just something that, like a Hero's Downfall, is good against Eldrazi Tron, and we can bring back a 2-3 after the fact. That's all the better. And Plague Man, unlike against some Eldrazi variants, you're not really going to kill anything with the debuff, but just a Death Touch that can trade with their bodies and pressure Planeswalkers is pretty good. These three cards are all interesting. It kind of depends on what you see out of the opponent and what you're afraid of, and we probably don't have room for all three, but if you are more afraid of Chalice of the Void, that would be the big reason to play a second Decay. If you're more afraid of Wormcoil Engine and or you're confident that you're going to be able to like untap with Kalitas, get the value, and have the zombies be really relevant, that's good. But I think he's more than anything to hose Wormcoil. And then Kitchen Finks, I think, is the safest and most all-around useful option. Is just a nice 2-for-1, a nice way to clog up the board and to help go wide. So those are all in consideration. So we have to see what comes out. And here are the cards that I elected to bring out, at least for Game 2 on the play. So the stuff like Inquisition can be fine, and by taking out Inquisition and not bringing in Brutality number 2, we are a little softer to Chalice, but to me, Chalice is the least of the worries, right? Chalice really is not a card that's very good against us, might not even be in post side, the least of our problems. I'm not a huge fan of Skoos in this matchup. I see that some people do like to leave them in. Yes, they can get bigger, but we can also expect maybe some grave hate from the opponent in either way. It's just slow, it's just clunky, it's just undersized unless you invest a lot of mana into it, and half the time getting the Eldrazi in the graveyard in the first place is kind of hard to do, so Skoos being dependent on that. I'm happy to move off of it. I'm also happy to move off of one tracker. Again, slow, clunky, and multiples. Their deck can be really fast, and also a non-bow with our triple Ouphe. Finally, Brutality just does not do enough. It just is the definition of a card that they go over the top of. So we could take these 7 out, and we could put these 7 in, and I think that's totally fine. If you want to mess around with anything else, actually, I do believe that we have the kitchen, that we did bring the Kitchen Finks in here, because I was like, okay, I only have room for one more of these 3. Do I rate the Finks more highly than Kalitas or than Decay? And you could have a few different options here. If we're comparing threats, I think leaving in one tracker is fine, or taking out one tracker is fine. Ditto with the final Skoos. I think on the play we want to leave in all of our Bobs. I think Questing Beast is strong enough to leave in both. I think Goyf is our very best card overall in the matchup, probably. So unless you wanted to go all the way down to no tracker or no Skoos, I would just diversify a little bit, maybe lose a Hexdrinker. This is very bad against a lot of things that they play. A lot of their early plays do punish it that otherwise might not punish other cards, and they have Blast Zone as an out to it, and All Is Dust, and Ugin. It's just maybe not always Ugin any longer, but the point is they have a lot of ways to win even if this becomes a 6-6. So my recommended siding for the play would be take out these 8, bring these other 8 cards in, and it's still a tough matchup, but let's see what we can do. Well, it's game 2, and we've got quite the hand. Only problem, a very, very slight problem of 0 lands to cast it. So we've got to throw back the Bob, the double Ouphe. That's really painful, but there's just no way around it. Opponent, of course, will keep 7 because Eldrazi Tron always seems to, at least against me. We bottom an extraneous land, and this hand is a lot less exciting. We don't have the gotcha card of Ouphe. We don't have the potential of Bob to run away with the game. We just kind of have a lot of like medium 3-drops. So no disruption right now, no Planeswalker. It's all a little bit rough, and then we just draw land. Opponent goes Eldrazi Temple, Blast Zone, Mind Stone, Map. So you can see where an early Collector Ouphe, if they don't have a way to remove it, could really, really slow them down and start putting the clock on. But sadly, we are not going to get to Ouphe them at the moment. We just draw another one of our relatively underwhelming threats. So what are you going to do? We're going to run out the Plague Man. That's what we're going to do. So I like Plague Man here because they are live to cast a Reality Smasher this turn. So just putting something down that can trade with that is fine. Opponent's going to go fetch a second Eldrazi Temple, and then they play the Thought-Knot, which is a little bit rough. The only consolation is we don't have anything that amazing to take, so they get rid of another Plague Man, makes sense. And we draw Tarmogoyf, so we crack the Peatland. I think it's correct to crack Peatland main phase. It is admittedly worse against another Thought-Knot, but I don't think that's sufficient cause to not do that main phase. There are way more rewards than ways in which we get punished, right? So we'll attack with the Plague Man. Even though they now have a clear attack with Thought-Knot, because our Tarmogoyf is still pretty small, we are not going to win by being passive and sitting back. We are going to start clocking, even though they can clock us right back. So start the clock with the Plague Man. Opponent goes Mind Stone into something big and scary. What else is new? Endbringer. Okay, so Endbringer is a definite scary one. And we draw Fatal Push, and it's just a shame. We're just so close. It's like if we had a fetch land here, we could push the Thought-Knot, we could pulse the Endbringer, and then we are really talking. But sadly, we cannot. And Endbringer, this is a card that just runs away with the game if they get to untap. Right now, our hope is that they're flooded, because they have a lot of lands and mana sources on field. If we let them just keep drawing cards with Endbringer, we are going to ensure that they gas out, right? So instead we just pulse that, and we have to let the Thought-Knot live, but we are clocking them pretty well. So gotta hope the opponent is kind of out of gas, and they're not. They've got another Thought-Knot. Very interesting, they take away Scooze. Not the Finks, which is more of a standalone threat, especially because there's a tension with Ooze between eating creatures, which will shrink the Goyf, and grow itself, versus not doing that. And not the Push, which can kill not only a Thought-Knot if we get Revolt, but can kill this Mind Stone that they make into a creature with Karn. So surprising to see that take, but we don't know exactly what their last card in hand is, I guess. But I'm fine with that. I feel like that take does give me a little bit of hope. So we're going to go ahead and Fatal Push the Mind Stone, because we just have to take away Karn, or get Karn the Great Creator down ASAP. It's a card advantage engine. It's a win condition with Mycosynth Lattice. There's just no way we don't push an attack, in my opinion. And if we didn't push, the opponent would be able to have a lot better blocks than they do here. Right now, we're forcing them to either lose the Karn or to chump, and we still get to damage the Karn. So I'm pretty fine with that. There are a lot of good things we could have drawn here off of that. Thought-Knot trigger to reward us. We didn't really, but Forest is actually okay. Like, going wide right now against this Karn is actually pretty decent. It does allow us to play the Finks. But sadly, the opponent has tutored for a Wormcoil Engine. And so Wormcoil is just like a card that we kind of can't really beat. Like, there are things that we can draw, series of draws that we can beat it, but right now, with it protecting a Karn with a Thought-Knot alongside it, kind of a card that we can't really beat. And it is therefore a little bit scary that the opponent doesn't even choose to play it. They're just cheating on mana so hard that they get to play, 5-8 mana worth of creatures this turn, and still not even have to use their Mind Stone. Pretty horrendous. You can see why I strongly dislike this matchup. And then we draw basic land off the top. So not as good, but look, our board is decent. We have a turn of decent attacks because they didn't play the Wormcoil. Our attacks are actually rather decent here. So we send every single one of them at Karn the Great Creator, and half expect the opponent to just let it go, but instead they're going to throw their whole board out in front of it. So, this is fine with us. Plague Man gets to trade off with Thought-Knots here, which is going to draw us a card. They get to draw a card off for Matter Reshaper. Expedition map, go straight to the field. We draw a basic land. So you see the disparity here. It's just not great. But we do get to continue clearing out the board. And if we had had some better top decks, you know, we could maybe kill Karn with a spell here, or just have ways in hand to start fighting through this Wurmcoil Engine that's still in hand. But instead, we just hit Swamp and Swamp off of our 2 most recent draws. Not exactly the most thrilling. And then the opponent, once again, their cup runneth over. They are so flush with riches that they don't even need to play the Wurmcoil. Instead, they just slam a 6-mana Planeswalker. I mean, what are we supposed to do against a deck like this, my friends? It's really tough. We just do need to kind of cheese them with Collector Ouphe most of the time. We need them to mulligan. We need them to stumble. We need early Tarmogoyf so that they can't handle, stuff like that. So, again, the opponent takes a line that maybe I'm not fully seeing the picture, but I think gives us a better chance to get back into the game than just slamming Wurmcoil Engine. But, you know, this animated map, this spirit, these are things we can beat. So we're going to activate Castle on the end step. Unfortunately, we draw yet another land, and then a Dark Confidant. Like, our stuff is just not competing with their bombs right now. It's just really not. Once again, we're just sending in the goons, trying to get their planeswalkers off the field. And Treetop Village is another reason why the opponent making these smaller things is not as effective as it could otherwise be. So we've got Finks and Village going at Karn the Great Creator, and Goyf going at Ugin. And the opponent's going to block like that. Map is going to trade with Finks, which is kind of a funny thing to say. They get a card off of the chump block, and Village will get through, finishing off Karn finally, but Ugin is still around. And because Ugin is still around, we're going to play Bob, just going to kind of keep going wide. Like, I understand they have Blast Zone, it would be nice to hit that, but we do have another turn to do that before it can be activated. And now the opponent will tick down with Ugin, probably the safest play. They've got a Thought-Knot Series, so there's like nothing that they don't have. It does whiff, so that's a bit of a consolation until they go Wurmcoil, and then just for good measure, just to really flex on us, they have a Dismember that they get to play as the last card, taking care of Bob. So we're done for. We don't have any outs. We're going to activate the castle just for fun. And then that is that. Tarmogoyf is great, but not going to beat that board. So again, I ask you, what are we supposed to do if they just go like 5-drop, 6-drop, 6-drop, and then a 5-drop and a 3-drop on the same turn, like all in the mid-game, and half of our cards just don't even fully or sometimes at all interact with what they're doing? This is just like my least favorite matchup. It really, truly is. And hey, you got to see me get stomped out by it. So I hope someone out there is liking it. Maybe some Eldrazi players. I know there are some of you out there watching this. There you go. You get to see your guys going to town. But yeah, I mean, I have beat the matchup before, of course. It can happen, but it is not one that I'm optimistic about. If anyone out there has any special insights, any super secret tech they're employing, I know stuff like Infernal Reckoning exists if you really hate this deck, but it just doesn't have the meta share to really warrant that, in my opinion. And even a card like Infernal Reckoning that barely has any utility outside of this matchup in Modern, it still doesn't really help us against Ugin and Karn the Great Creator and Blast Zone to control our board. Like, we can draw our really narrow hate piece and it's still just kind of a 1-for-1, you know, that gains us some life. It's efficient, but whatever. I mean, it's not going to be our savior, so I think we just have to endure this matchup, hope we get to steal a match here or there, and otherwise just get beat up by the aliens. What else are we going to do? So, well done to the opponent. You got us, and we're down to 2-2 in this league. Not our greatest ever showing, but we are still live to cash it. Let's go to round 5. On the play here for the 5th and final round of this Modern League, and we've got a nice balanced opening hand, though we haven't had all that many of them. Excuse me, did I say play? We are on the draw. We've had a lot of kind of unbalanced hands, some decent ones, and then some unbalanced ones. Opponent goes Bloodstained Mire into Overgrown Tomb into Inquisition. So right away, my first thought is Jund, because it could be other decks, but my first thought is Jund because it's the most common such deck playing these cards in the format. I am therefore surprised to see Tarmogoyf go, because you would think that taking away our Inquisition if they have like a turn 2 Renin 6 would be big game, or just taking Tracker looking for the late game, so I'm a little bit confused and saying, okay, maybe it's not Jund. We'll see. But either way, we will find out with a turn 1 Inquisition, and we draw another Goyf right after they took ours away, so that's kind of cool. We see that it is not, in fact, traditional Jund. Monomorphos, to me, indicates Traverse Shadow in the Jund colors. So what do? Monomorphos is a fine card. It's a redraw. They have the Goyf, but we can push the Goyf. So I think we're pretty happy to just take away that Thoughtseize. And now, unless the opponent draws another discard spell, our Tracker is poised to run away with this game in the mid-game, assuming we sometime draw a 4th land, right? So opponent will Monomorphos looking for more action. At the end of the day, they just stick with what was probably their initial plan of playing out the Goyf. We play Treetop Village because it's mana efficient and because we're just going to push the Goyf this turn. I think that's better than playing our own Goyf. The opponent is rewarded, however, for their sequencing for not taking the Tracker the first time, because they do draw another Thoughtseize. They do get to take away our Tracker. There goes our late game engine. And after losing burn, at the hands of some kind of rough variants, and then after getting stomped by Eldrazi, I remember grumbling and being like, oh, opponent's always so lucky. But who's always so lucky? It's us, because we draw the Liliana of the Veil, best possible draw in this situation. Liliana comes down, edict the opponent. Sometimes Magic is that easy when we got Liliana on our side, right? So, interesting call here. We could just dump out our whole hand. We could play Field of Ruin, we could cast Tarmogoyf, we could trophy probably Blood Crypt, and then we could tick up. Or we could just tick up and pitch the field. So, a judgment call, but whichever line we take, we kind of need to stick with it. Like, if we just tick up, we are committing to playing a more, like, a less free-flowing game where we will always have the freedom to tick up Liliana. So that was an idea well worth mulling over, but at the end of the day, I did decide to hold on to our removal spells because they're really, really good in this matchup. So we tick up, we get a Temur Battle Rage out of the opponent's hand, and we play our Goyf. And we got Lily back to 2, which is big game. Opponent's last card in hand was Fatal Push, so they use it, they crack the Peatland, 2 fresh cards, they see another Peatland, and a Mishra's Bauble. That's really good for the opponent, actually, because those are 2 other sources of card advantage that play well around the Liliana +1. So, opponent will upkeep Bauble us. Interesting. Definitely makes sense because that allows them, of course, to see what we draw for turn. So we have Collective Brutality, not a very impressive card. So instead, we're just going to attack with the Treetop Village, get the damage across. They are a shadow deck. There are sometimes consequences to doing that, but we're representing removal for shadows well with Lily and with Trophy. So we are going to connect for 3, and then we're going to leave Liliana at 2. Now it would be really, really nice to put her to 3, and in some ways Brutality is kind of a free pitch. But if we do that, then we are going on the plan of doing that again next turn, right? This way, the opponent might try to go wide enough to overwhelm the Liliana, force us to cash her in. This might work to our advantage, depending on what we draw, so I did decide to just play it cautious with Lily, just keep our resources in hand. Now that we have an opportunity for a symmetrical discard, now I'm happy to put her to 3. Tick her back up, get rid of that Brutality, and Fatal Push was, of course, a marvelous draw. We could indeed have pushed the Goyf and then trophied them off of red. That was actually an option there too. Or even just trophy the red and hold push. But instead, again, we're going to be more patient with our trophy. So they move to attacks, we push the Goyf. Opponent's got another Bauble, and then they're going to pass. So, here we can trophy, and if we trophy, it would be the red land. I actually thought about it, but I was like, they are gated by mana right now, and it is going to turn on an instant speed 3 mana spell. I'm thinking potentially Kolaghan's Command. We might still be able to beat it, but if they go Shock our Lily, return a Goyf, Then we tick up, go to 2. Then we have to cash in the Lily next turn for a Goyf. It could just go a little bit wrong. So once more, I decided to play really cagely with the trophy. And, you know, who knows what else they could have. Maybe they have something that they could do in response as well. Once again, they're going to bobble us on the upkeep, and we draw a Hissing Quagmire, and that's a good value play. It really is in this matchup, so I am content to run that out and to leave the Lily at 3, just hanging on to trophy. Can always fire it off at instant speed. We're not getting max value out of Liliana, but again, we committed to this path in the mid-game, so we're going to stick to it. And same incentive here, another good play, another good thing to play out, and more reason to stick at 3 of Liliana. Feels a little bit weird, but I do think it is justifiable sequencing in light of the path that we've chosen. And look at that, opponent was sitting on the K command. They're going to buy back a shadow, they're going to discard us, force that trophy out of our hands, so this is fine. This just turns into a just a 3 mana raise dead, and we get to take them off of red, so pretty cool with me. And we're probably just about taxing them out of basics as well. We're holding up Peatland, we're holding up Treetop. Opponent goes Shadow, Bauble, and then they'll pass. End step will crack Peatland. We have more than enough reasons to do so. We have mana sinks on field, we have lots of mana still, and we draw Tarmogoyf and Swamp. So the Swamp is not very exciting, but it lets us have a pretty efficient turn of going Goyf and edicting their Shadow, and then attacking with Treetop Village. I just main phased the Goyf because they cracked Bauble, they already knew about it. They know what we're going to do this turn, right? So we're getting aggro with the Treetop Village. Opponent is continuing to refill their hands like really well around Liliana with all these Baubles and these Peatlands, right? So after all of this attrition, they're still on 3 cards. They got Plague Man, and they got a red land again. Okay, so it's decent stuff. It's really decent stuff. We draw a Scooze. That's a pretty good draw. So we'll go ahead and play out the Scooze, and then take Liliana up. Of course, that gives away a little bit of info, but we want the asymmetrical discard, and we're going to animate Treetop. So that's why we do that. We get a Street Wraith out of their hand. They were 1 land away from hardcasting that bad boy. And then we attack. We're just putting pedal to the metal here, just trying to aggro them out before they can stabilize. Plague Man will trade off with Goyf. Treetop Village gets in for 2. We've got either one of our things connecting is going to win, so I don't know what they could have, especially game 1. Whatever they drew, it is not enough. So, Treetop Village was awesome there, helping to close out the game. And of course, Liliana of the Veil putting in yet another dominant display here. In this case against Traverse Shadow, but she's been very good against Burn, and she would have been our out in game 1 against Eldrazi if we had managed to hit the 3rd land. So, definitely a really nice debut game in this final match. Nice to win any game 1, and we are against Traverse Shadow, so a little bit of different incentives at play here from other Shadow variants. Let's check out how we side. Okay, so we are against Jund Traverse Shadow. Now, for what it's worth, I believe that this is a little bit harder to beat than Grixis Shadow on average for us, and a little bit easier to beat than Mardu Shadow. It's not a terribly huge gap between these different variants, but thought that to be worth mentioning. But we do have a couple different incentives in play, as I said. So let's look at what we like. So Nihil Spellbomb, they're a Traverse deck. This can shut off their graveyard effects pretty well, and it also grinds pretty well in a similar way that plays around discard to how their Baubles operate. So we like that. They do play a very low curve. So Abrupt Decay should be basically universal removal for any of their permanents. Kalitas, Kitchen Finks, Murderous Rider. These are all X for 1s that grind very well. They help us stabilize against their more aggressive starts. They help us take over the game. They help us go wide to finish them off. These are all very, very good value-oriented plays in this matchup. And finally, Plague Engineer. So with most Traverse builds, I don't believe we're likely to see anything that the Plague Man can outright kill. However, Jund Traverse Shadow is excellent at finding and accommodating and deploying and clearing the way for and recurring giant threats like Tarmogoyf and Shadow. So just simply having a Plague Man to trade off with them, and again to help go wide and close out games, is very, very good. That said, I don't believe you necessarily need to play all 3 copies. It depends on what else is going on. So let's see what else is going on. So in terms of what can come out, I think we want to go mostly away from discard, so I think at least 4 discard spells can come out, and we also can cut a land in these grindy matchups. We're going to make it Urborg. So these 6 cards are all out. And then I think these 5 cards plus 1 Plague Man at least is definitely in. So this would be totally fine. But here for Game 2, on the draw, we saw that they were main decking Plague Men of their own, so I think Dark Confidant gets a little bit worse with that knowledge, especially on the draw. So what I'm going to do is cut away another Dark Confidant, play another Plague Engineer. Now note that we do have still 2 more Inquisitions in the deck. I think cutting one and playing a Plague Man, the 3rd Plague Man is fine, but on the draw, I'm a little bit more inclined to leave in 2 Inquisitions. I don't think that's an overwhelming amount. I don't think that's necessarily too many. And because I did mention they do play such a low curve, I think most lists are unlikely to have anything that Thoughtseize can hit but Inquisition cannot. There might be a rogue like 4-drop value play or something, maybe somebody's spicing in a questing beast, but realistically speaking, Inquisition's going to do what Thoughtseize does, but a little bit better in this matchup. So here's my advice. For Game 2, like you're about to see on the play, we set up like this. And every single card in our decks are really good. We've got a little bit of hand disruption, but not so much that we're likely to top deck it when it gets grindy. If they take us to Game 3, we're going to be on the play. I think we just go full-on threat dense mode, play the 3rd Plague Man, bring back the 3rd Bob, and run it like that. Either way, let's go check out Game 2. Well, we're on the draw against Shadow, and this hand is okay. If we hit our 3rd and 4th lands, it's going to be pretty good, and most of our other cards, or at least a lot of them, are castable on 2, so it's a certain keep. You know, we could ask for a little bit more interaction, but it's definitely a fine keep. So the opponent goes Mire, Bauble, go. We draw another threat, not ideal, but still plenty of time to hit our land, still plenty of time to hit more interaction. So opponent will crack the Bauble, crack another Bauble. They know the contents of both top decks. I believe on one of them they did the scry trick where they looked at the top of their deck, decided whether they wanted to draw it or not, and used Bauble to facilitate that. And then they go Blood Crypt, Tarmogoyf. We draw yet another threat, so it's just very clunky with all the threats. Playing out a threat here doesn't seem very good because it does... We can get the Hexdrinker blown out by a Plague Engineer. We can get Skooz or Goyf blown out by a Liliana if they have that. In general, they're just likely to have some type of interaction for it. So I'm going to play a little bit more defensively, try to extend the game, try to make my land drops, and try to also protect a Liliana, because if we can... we figured they would have at least one other creature to play this turn, so if we can trophy one and then draw a land and play Liliana next turn, we should be in a much better position than if we cannot protect her, right? So we trophy the attacking Goyf, they main phased another, and then they will traverse for another Goyf. This is very interesting because they clearly can fetch, shock, play a Shadow. But I don't know if they're playing around something specific. Maybe they think they can't protect it from a Collective Brutality or something, or who knows, but it means they can't go as wide as they would otherwise be able to this turn, and we hit our 3rd land, so boom, got him. We get to take him down with the Liliana, or do we? They fetch, shock, and now it all becomes so clear. They had a Veil of Summer, so they get to blow our Edict effect out. It feels so bad to get hit by this card. It feels so bad. Definitely feels rough. I don't know how common that is in decks like this, but certainly nailed us there. So, opponent will untap. They're going to play out that other Goyf. So now we're kind of praying for a Maelstrom Pulse. They're going to get rid of our Lily here. And then they're going to play out a Shadow. And then they're going to play out another Shadow. So now it's like, what do we even pulse, right? So, not for the first time this league, it must be said. We kind of wish we had a Damnation in the deck. That might be like a card that can be pretty darn good against Eldrazi without being so narrow as to be virtually useless elsewhere. So maybe on the evidence of this league at least, we're a little bit more interested in Damnation than we have historically been since the Plague Man came out, right? But what to cut for it is another story. In any case, we go Goyf, we go Hexy. Hexy's just got a chump block this turn. And the opponent's attacking all out. I think whether they have just total gas in hand or nothing at all, they're still going to. So we can't read too much into this. I think we do go for the higher line here, the higher upside of actually getting a kill on the Shadow. So we'll block this way, but we're pretty doomed, I think, kind of no matter what. And the opponent's going to K-command, and I think if they had just K-commanded the Hexdrinker before we went to blocks, they would have had lethal, but maybe they just want to flex on us, and yeah, they're flexing hard. They play the Goyf, they're just styling, and they would leave themselves dead to land Damnation. Sadly, we have neither. Don't even have Damnation in the deck, so absolutely wrecked, and this is exactly what I meant in the sideboard, how they are very good at just finding and recurring and paving the way for these gigantic threats. Like, we just have to have stuff that can withstand this in this matchup, which is why we sideboard the way we did. Sadly, here we were too clunky for our own good, especially being on the draw, and the opponent just went way too wide and way too tall for us to possibly compete with. So that was a really scary curve out from the opponent, and yeah, that was a brutal one, my friends, especially when the Veil of Summer. I was feeling confident until Veil of Summer blew us out, and it just all went to hell from there. So that was a pretty tough one, and now we've got to go to Game 3. We've got to fight hard to try to cash this league. Let's see if we can do it. And here it is, my friends, for all the marbles, and we have a mono threats hand, which is definitely not great, but better, much better, in fact, to have that on the play than the draw. If we're on the draw, we really want, like, the all-interaction hand more than the all-threats hand, and, you know, we just don't in general like to mulligan. So the opponent, in fact, has had to take a mulligan, which is great news for us. We're just running out Hexdrinker. Yes, it can get blown out by the Plague Man, but this does give us a lot more lines, a lot more options than slow rolling it, which I'll explain as we go. Plus, with our natural curve out of 1, 2, 3, 4, it doesn't really make sense to slow roll threats, so this thing's very vulnerable and probably will be for at least a little while, but that is what it is. So we get in with a Snake for 2. You could argue not to because they're a Shadow deck. I think, again, with the fact that we are so threat dense, I think we do want to take an aggressive posture when we're not certain. So we'll attack, and we're just going to pump a couple levels into it, give the opponent something to think about here, maybe complicate their decision-making for the next 2 turns. Opponent does all the bobble stuff on the end step. They're going to see a bunch of new cards. And they notably did not fetch and shock, which means they're probably not on Shadow, and they are probably concerned about their life total. So worth noting. And then they've got Peatland into Goyf. So we've drawn a Treetop Village. You know, these draws aren't bad. We're definitely curving out with all of our threats here. So the first thing we do, first order of business, is put the Hexdrinker to a 4/4. Now the Hexdrinker is actually really, really good, because almost all, if not literally all, of their interaction is going to be instant speed, and we're now immune from it, and we are now something that is going to outsize Tarmogoyf, at least for the moment. So in order to play around an Edict effect or just being like a fine supplementary play, we are going to play the Scooze. So by running out Hexdrinker early, we got to do a few things. Number one, we got to establish early pressure. Number 2, we got to force the opponent to decide whether or not to remove the Hexdrinker before it hit this threshold. And if they had, I think that would have been fine for us, because we have a lot of cards that can take over the late game in our hand. Like if we just trade 1 for 1 and then land a Scooze or land a Kalitas and draw interaction, then those things can take over the game. So, and now that the opponent was not able to or declined to deal with a Hexdrinker before it became a 4/4. Now it's a real win condition. So the opponent's going to main phase a K command. That's pretty rough, of course, and we are going to have to ditch our Treetop Village because we want to be able to curve out with our lands, and Peatland is very, very good here. So we gave ourselves the option to play Kalitas. Depending on what we drew, of course, that would be reasonable. We draw Plague Man. That's decent, but not the very best here. If we wanted to trade Hexdrinker for Goyf, we could attack. If they block, we can blow them out with Plague Man. I don't think we want to, though. I think Finks is the play here, because Finks is going to ensure us against an Edict effect just like it did last turn. And it is way more resilient than Ooze as a blocker or as a, way to catch removal and come back. And it also allows us to have Hexdrinker go all the way to level 8 next turn if we so desire. Unless the opponent does this, they're going to play a Fulminator Mage and immediately Stone Rain our Peatland, taking away our future draw, and taking away our potential to go to 8 unless we hit an untapped land. So, very, very interesting game here. Then the opponent fetches for a basic, goes to get a Shadow, so it's a really nice turn for the opponent. Let's see what we can do. We untap, and we draw Tarmogoyf. Okay, so not the most impressive, but once again we see the mana efficiency of just being able to shore up our turns by putting 1 level on Hexdrinker, or 2 levels, even if we can't dedicate a whole turn to it, even if it's not perfect. Look, we just get to keep pursuing this plan of going wide, presenting dangerous threats. We don't really have good attacks, but the opponent doesn't really have good plays either, necessarily, and we're just slowly creeping up toward level 8. We in fact are representing it on board. So the opponent will play out that Shadow, they're going to play out another land, 2 unknowns in hand, and they are just saying go. They're also representing 2 draws with Peatland. We draw an Overgrown Tomb. Okay, not the very best, but we're going to go for it. It's time. We've slow rolled this long enough. We're going to put the Hexdrinker all the way up to level 8. And we're going to make the opponent have something. So this is going to be awesome in a few different ways. So number 1, of course, it's going to put them to 1. And they are dead on board. But it's even better than that because they probably need to have, in any kind of a realistic universe, they need to have a lot of stuff go right. And in order to do that, in order to have like 3 removal spells for our board to maybe then attack for lethal, they might also need a Temur Battle Rage to be part of this. They are going to be gated by mana because they can no longer activate Nurturing Peatland. So Peatland is going to be very value positive for them here, but if they have to cash both of them in, and I guess they might as well because they can't tap them for mana, they're unlikely to be able to untap and beat us this turn, and indeed they cannot. So Hexdrinker stealing the game from Shadow, and admittedly it did not do it alone, just having the, this is kind of how the opponent won game 2, just literally playing out threats too many to be handled by the opposition. That's what we did here. The early turns with Hexdrinker, will they deal with it? Won't they deal with it? We can pivot based on what they do to an acceptable plan either way. But because they didn't, we then made it a Hexdrinker game, and Hexdrinker sure did close out this game with Finks and Goyf playing defense for the card against a possible Liliana, and also just for our life total, giving us the time to get all the way up to level 8 and be absolutely unstoppable. So we still had plenty of gas in hand. Of course, the opponent was on 5 cards, so did they. But Hexdrinker getting over the line, you gotta love it. So that was our league, my friends. That was our 3-2, and let's do a quick wrap-up. Okay, everybody, so there was another league cashed. Now, the last several leagues I've played, I've said it's been so long since we've gone negative. That's no longer true. I did play another league that did not go so well. I actually had 2 negative leagues before this one. One, just the deck was just totally non-functional. I was just mulling to oblivion. Opponents just curving out ruthlessly on us. And that was a very, very poor league. But we also had another league I want to tell you about very quickly that actually gave me a lot of optimism for the deck, even though the result wasn't great. The result was a 2-3, but we were against Blue-White Control, Jeskai Control, Jund, Dredge, and one other super grindy deck that I'm struggling to remember right now exactly what it was. But we were playing against a lot of decks that have advantages against us, plus Dredge, which I think is pretty 50-50. But the 3-color fair decks, or the dedicated control decks, they do tend to have a slight edge against us, slight to moderate edge, and even though it was only a 2-3, that was another league where I took a lot of mulls. I actually thought about uploading that one instead of this one, but I did think that right now it was pretty timely to show 3 burn matchups. It's just one that we want to be super familiar with, be able to beat in our sleep, right? At least to play well against in our sleep. So that's why I chose this one, and I think the Eldrazi match was a little bit of a BTFO for us, but the Traverse Shadow match was also really cool. But in any case, back to the 2 and 3 league that I played off camera. I was mulling more than the opponents for sure. I was flooding and being mono-screwed more than the opponents for sure. And those are unfavorable matchups, yet I very, very nearly won all of the matches that I lost. And it is because, in my opinion, the new Eldraine technology makes us a lot more competitive in those matchups than we used to be. Questing Beast didn't show up much in this league that we just saw, but QB was arguably the MVP of this other league that I'm talking about. Castle had some really nice moments to shine, and Murderous Rider, of course, is a good 2-for-1 in all of those matchups. So that's the optimistic take, is that even though my results did fall off a little bit in this little batch of play from where they have historically been in the recent past, and I guess overall, the deck feels like it now has the tools to be a lot more competitive against other grindy decks, against other fair decks. So just wanted to throw that anecdote in there just to keep you appraised, keep you abreast of the status of Rock as I see it. But our league here was pretty cool, I thought. I love to play against Burn. It's a skill testing matchup in many ways. It's also one where you can just kind of get into Zen mode and relax and know exactly what you should be doing, but at the same time it's very thrilling because it often comes down to one top deck at the very last turn. Will they top deck Burn, won't they? It's often very close edge of the seat stuff, so I hope you did enjoy it. I hope you're also having fun playing in whatever capacity you do play. I know most of my viewers, but not all, are BGX players, so whatever you're running out there, I hope it's going well for you. Thank you once again to our 4 patrons that we're thanking specifically today. Once again, the names are not going to be correct, but we'll try. Renaud Bourgogne, Andre Gugnac, Remy Marchiat, and OD402. Thank you so much, my friends. And of course, let me know if you have any feedback here on sideboarding or on the list or on anything else. Next up, we are going to play live recorded leagues again, starting with Sultai. Or visiting Sultai, it's another donation league. You love to see that. And we're going to splash a little blue into our green and black lives. It's going to be great. So more content to come as always. You know where to find it. It's right here. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I will talk to you soon.